with that said, thank you. I will give the word to Eugene.
Yeah, thank you, Erica. So today we have our inaugural Monica Rosén Memorial Lecture, and as I was thinking about something to say before the lecture, you know, I think when our colleagues or family members died, we're faced with the sadness of not having them, but I think we're also faced with our own mortality, you know, which is kind of it's coming. You know, it might be delayed or might be take a while, but it's coming. So I think, and I also am reminded of the movie Coco. I don't know if you saw the movie Coco, where it talks about the tradition of the Day of the Dead, that for that as long as we keep remembering those that have passed, they remain alive somewhere out there. You know, so I think it in that spirit, I think we decided to initiate this memorial lecture and give Monica name it after Monica, whom we worked with very closely over the past few years, and who was a tireless researcher, contributor, mentor to many people. Many of her students are in this call as well. So I think it's you know, we couldn't have thought of a better person to name this lecture after. The lecturer today is going to be Elena Papanastasiou, and the title of her keynote is Bridging Gaps and Improving the Future, Transforming Challenges into Opportunities Through Large-Scale Assessments. Professor Elena Papanastasiou is the Dean of the School of Education at the University of Nicosia, where she also serves as the coordinator of the doctoral program of the school. Her research interests lie in the areas of assessment, process data, and research methods. At an international level, her research work has been acknowledged by the fact that she has been awarded the honorary title of Fellow of the Association of Educational Assessment, Europe. Moreover, in 2020, she was selected as a council member of AEA Europe, in which she serves as chair of the Professional Development Committee. Professor Papanastasiou currently serves as co-convener of Network 9 and of the European Conference in Educational Research, while she also serves as a national expert for the European Reference Index for the Humanities and the Social Sciences. In addition to the above, Professor Papanastasiou is very actively involved in the International Association of Educational Achievement, where she currently serves as the General Assembly representative for the Republic of Cyprus and as an invited member of its Publications Committee. Within this organization, she has also served as an elected member of the Standing Committee of the IEA. Within the IEA from 2014 to 2017. So without further ado, we welcome Elena, and we look forward to hearing your presentation. And the format is going to be that Elena will speak for about, I think, 30 minutes or so, the presentation. And then we will open up the floor for questions for Elena or for discussions on the topic that she will be presenting.
Okay, so can everyone see my slides properly?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay, so thank you for being here today. And to this inaugural lecture, I also would like to actually thank Monica, even in spirit, since she was the one that originally nominated me to give this keynote. So I thank her for this as well. So regarding this presentation, first of all, let me just say that in the beginning, this was a difficult presentation to prepare. And the reason for that, it was because when I was trying to prepare it so that I would give it originally in Cyprus, there were two things that I wanted to achieve. First, I wanted to create a presentation that would potentially be useful to researchers but as well as educators from Cyprus, since the conference did take place there. But at the same time, I felt that such a presentation would not be innovative enough. So my second goal was to be able to present some more innovative research, since this is a keynote speech for Network 9. And I wanted it to be useful for researchers as well. So based on this, these two needs, that's how I structured this presentation. So I'm going to focus on using two examples. Where in example one, I wanted to present information on how we can utilize large-scale assessments to improve education and student outcomes by focusing on teachers, practitioners, and policymakers. And the second example is more targeted towards presenting research results on alternative ways of using large-scale assessments. But first, let me just start with two assumptions. The one is that every country wants the best for its educational system, and the other is that every country also wants the best for its children. And I think, these are basic assumptions, and I think that we can all agree on that. However, the ways in which best is defined differ significantly from country to country. And obviously, that's because there's a lot of cultural, social, economic factors that influence these decisions. And as a result, the methods that are used to reach the best also differ significantly. So based on these variations, there's a bunch of ways in which we can compare countries to each other. And this is something like the comparison of countries is something that became very evident to me recently when I attended a conference in the United States where there was a special group of presentations by high school students, and you can see them in the picture here, who had been doing research within their school settings, along with university researchers. So last year specifically, there were about 9 teams from the USA that participated in that conference, and 1 team from Cyprus, which I had taken to the conference. And as part of that event, the students had to write 50-word bios about themselves. And these bios were put together by the organizers and shared with all of the participants. And when I started reading them, it was evident to me that the ways in which the students from Cyprus described themselves varied significantly from the way the students from the United States described themselves. And most likely, these differences were based on the kind of reflection of the emphasis that was placed by the educational systems of the countries that they came from. And just to give you an example of what I mean with these variations, if you looked at the quotes from Cyprus, they basically emphasized grades, awards, and academic assessments and competitions. So they said things like, so-and-so had an excellent academic standing, is a straight-A student. They secured the first and third place in these competitions, or they passed the IGCSE exams in English with an A at the age of 12. In contrast, this is what the bios from a lot of students in the United States look like. So, one person said, I developed an interactive student curriculum review board workshop, wrote a policy on criminal justice and misuse of authority, co-hosted a community policy seminar, and participated in building a student bill of rights for our district. And I was reading at that, and, I kept thinking, I never did all of these things. Now, these were high school students. Another person described themselves and said that her research interests include studying the effects of ocean acidification, evaluating effective methods to minimize food waste and reduce single-use plastics. She leads whale-watching tours and collects data on whales' migratory patterns. And again, as I said before, high school students. So basically, comparisons are inevitable. And by making comparisons by themselves are not inherently bad in any way. But the question arises, why should we care about these comparisons? Well, it all depends on who you are and what questions you need to answer. So, for example, if you look at it from the student perspective, you might ask, which educational system is a better fit for me? Or how would I have to prepare differently if I wanted to attend a university in another country? If you're an employer, what candidate would be more suitable for my needs based on how each candidate was educated? Or from a school perspective, how can I get my students more involved in, extracurricular activities, volunteering if I care about these, or academic excellence if I care about these? Or how can I give my students a better chance for a future employment? So differences do exist, and people can choose to use them in any number of ways. And if you look on the internet, people are constantly comparing countries to each other. So you find things like world's happiest countries, world's richest countries, the global gender index gap. And people tend to accept these ranking and these results. But then if you end up looking at international comparisons of educational achievement, people tend to get angry with these. So here, for example, we have the Tim's math grade results for grade 4 from 2015, and you can see, the countries, how they did, and you can see Singapore was, the highest in terms of achievement here. If you look at science in the 4th grade, again with Tim's, again, you can see the countries, how they did, and again, Singapore had the highest overall achievement. But what got me wondering is, why do so many people get angry with large-scale assessments? So in preparation for this presentation, I took a look at many of the critics of ILSAs to take a look at their claims. And what I realized is that these negative comments ended up stemming from the following issues. For one, a lot of them were people made unsubstantiated causal claims based on wrong statistical analyses. And obviously, if we're not using experimental methods, we can't really say that something caused something else. And also, we cannot see something like, let's say, this country, the students have so much recess during the day, and they also have high achievement. So, we shouldn't be saying, since both of these things occur, then, every country should give so much recess, and then the achievement will increase as well. These are unsubstantiated causal claims. But at the same time, people tend to generalize either results from one subject matter to a whole educational system. So let's say if their country, if one country is doing very well in one specific area, it doesn't necessarily mean that all of the educational system is doing well. Or if a country did not do well in science, for example, it doesn't mean that they are not good in any other subject. But so, people tend to generalize from one subject to the other to everything else, which is wrong. But then other people tend to generalize success stories of individuals to a whole educational system. So they'll say, I cannot accept that, my country is not doing well because I know this person that is from my country and they succeeded so much in the future. So our educational system could not be that bad. And then there's another group of people that just tend to exclusively focus on the end results and on the rankings. And the problem is that when we only look at league tables and at end results in isolation, this can be very misleading. And the reason for that is because education is a process. It's about what we teach, how we teach, who teaches, school policies, homework assigned, textbooks used, technology used. And in all cases, the end goal is to hopefully ensure success for all students, no matter how success is defined. So basically, regarding research in education, it's obvious that the process is the key to success. And by process, I mean two things. First is looking at how countries have achieved their end results. It's so much more interesting to look at this perspective than just look at the end results, and also examine how to utilize the data to make sense of the study results. So in the next slides, what I want to do is I plan to focus on two separate examples to demonstrate exactly these two perspectives. So here's the first example. Now, these are the results from an international large-scale assessment from 1983. And it's for grade 5 science. And we can see here that these were the achievements of the 15 countries that took part of the study. And yeah, this is how well they did. And I could ask, what do you typically believe were the top ranked countries in this study? Or where do you believe, when I ask this question, I get a lot of people saying, Singapore. Singapore was probably, the most highly ranked. However, these are the results. So these are the results from the second international science study from 1983. And we can see that Singapore was not leading in this study. Okay, so it's quite eye-opening to realize that, okay, Singapore was not always among the top, and Hong Kong is right, below with the same scores, basically. And if we look at grade 9 again, and, ask, where do you believe that Singapore is ranked? Again, we can see that this is how they did, and along with the USA, and then it was Hong Kong again. And obviously, what we see here is very, very different from what we've seen in 2019, since the 2023 results haven't come out yet. So here again, we see that Singapore, is the highest ranked country, the same with science, grade 8, the same with Pearl's data. So the big question is, what happened with Singapore? And how did it get from the bottom to the top of such rankings? And however, I need to make this very, very distinct clarification that what I will be presenting, it doesn't have to do with copying Singapore, because copying Singapore does not work. So it's not what I'm suggesting. And obviously, this is one case study. But my goal here is to demonstrate the methodology that was used in Singapore through educational research and through large-scale assessments to improve its educational system. And as I said before, this is a component that I really cared about for people within Cyprus, policymakers, the ministry, etc., as well as teachers, to start thinking about not looking at large-scale assessments in the sense that we want automatic answers. Oh, this is what they did and it was successful, then assuming that automatically it would work for us. So what I want to demonstrate here is the methodology, and this is what I want to focus on. So let's take it from the beginning. So in 1975, there was this one turning point in Singapore's educational system. They had done this one study where they realized that 25% of elementary school graduates did not meet the minimum numeracy requirements. And also they had a 29% dropout rate, even at elementary school, which is shocking, actually. And obviously, these are unacceptable results. However, the critical points were that first, they accepted the data, denial was not an option, and they decided to act. So they committed on taking action based on the data to improve the things that were going wrong. So they had to identify them and improve them. And this was extremely important for them because Singapore is a country, it's a small island. It has few natural resources. So they realized that they had to invest on their people. And just because education was it still is important for them, and it's perceived as a means to a better life, they really wanted to work on this aspect. But they also realized that students do live in an increasingly interdependent and networked world. So it was important for them to benchmark student results because some of these students might want to compete in the global market. So they need to be able to have the skills to do so. So that's why they invested on large-scale assessments. Because through them, they could utilize trend data to monitor changes over time. They could use contextual data to understand the context of the data, as well as benchmark student outcomes. And this was especially useful because of the wide availability of data from large-scale assessments, and especially because you could track the educational process from the intended curriculum to the taught and the attained curriculum, in addition to all the questionnaires that are administered beyond the actual tests. So let's start with the data. So when Singapore participated in the reading literacy study in 1991, they got the results. And then in 2001, which was 10 years later, when they participated in PEARLS, they realized that no progress had taken place in the subject of English. And in addition to that, they realized that the gap between low achievers and high achievers had increased. And they were not happy with either of these results. They didn't care about being, at the same level. They didn't care about increasing the achievement only for the high achievers. They wanted to make progress throughout all the levels of education. So one of the things that they did is that they decided that they wanted to develop a core set of pedagogies to guide English learning. So they created the STELLAR program, which stands for Strategies for English Language Learning and Reading. And in order to create this program, during the development stage, they did a bunch of activities. So they conducted literature reviews, they consulted with teachers, they observed classes, they spoke to community stakeholders, they engaged with employers and got feedback from them. Things like, okay, what are the problems that you see with students or with the graduates that you employ? What do they need to work more on? So they took that into account. And they developed this program in 2006. But that was not it. They still had to evaluate it. So that's where the large-scale assessments were integrated. So they used data from PEARLS to be able to track reading progress compared to their own results in the previous years. But at the same time, they wanted to be looking at both high and low achievers. So they were focusing on that. They also wanted to look at how they were doing and the students were doing in responding to questions that required higher order thinking skills. And through the questionnaires, what they did is they looked at the reading habits of the students. So they weren't only interested about achievement per se. They realized that throughout the year, students ended up spending less and less time on reading outside of the classroom. So, but this has so many advantages for students that they decided that, okay, we're going to change the structure of a day in school so that students can have a chance to read books during the day in school in order to increase their reading and improve their reading habits. So their focus was more than just achievement. Another goal that they had was that they wanted to move towards an inquiry-oriented based learning. And I think a lot of countries aim for that. But what did they do? They decided they had to change their curriculum framework so that it was based on an inquiry-based model. And then after they did that, they worked on professional development, which was targeted towards both pre-service and in-service teachers. And it aimed to help teachers develop and implement these approaches. But they didn't stop there. They continued with regular school visits by the ministry where teachers could actually ask for help and say, oh, why don't you come and observe my lesson and see what I'm doing wrong? Or how can I design my lessons in a better way? And so they would provide feedback to the teachers within this framework. They also performed some small-scale studies to assess its implementation and effectiveness. But again, those were small-scale studies which wouldn't really be able to generalize to the whole country. So that's when they decided that they would use the TIMSS data to obtain countrywide quantitative data, where they focused on the use of inquiry-based approaches based on the teacher's questionnaire. And then a third goal that they wanted to do as a third example is that they wanted to focus more on higher order thinking skills, creativity, and reasoning. But by evaluating the curriculum, they realized that it did not really allow for adequate time for to achieve these goals with the students. So that's when they decided to make drastic changes to reduce the curriculum even up to 30% in some cases, so that the teachers could go more in depth than in breadth, and they would avoid just covering things broadly or superficially. And we can see that what ended up happening is that even that Singapore ended up having the lowest curriculum match among the countries here. And but besides this result, we can see that it did extremely well. And if the difference in achievement scores between national and international achievement scales was up to 80 points. So we can see that they were still able to utilize TIMSS data to make their decisions and evaluate them. So what insights can we obtain from Singapore? First of all, they embrace database decision-making to support any changes. They utilized multiple sources of data. So they supplemented the use of the large-scale assessments with small-scale studies, literature reviews, study visits abroad. They got feedback from student teachers and administrators. And so they basically used more than just achievement data. And so that based on all of these things, they made changes, but then they worked on evaluating and reevaluating these changes that they did to ensure the validity of these results. And again, the iterative process of these studies capitalizes. You could capitalize on them to see, across time how well you're doing. So with large-scale assessments, we're definitely sitting in a treasure trove of data that we definitely need to be able to use to make informed decisions for our educational systems. So this was one example that, as I said before, I wanted to focus on, that in order to provide ideas and examples to more teachers and policymakers. Now I want to go into the more research aspect of my presentation, which is the second example that I wanted to focus on. As I said before, if you look at large-scale assessments, especially the ones from the IEA, data is collected from multiple sources and are of various types. However, now that the tests are administered in a computerized format, we also have process data that are available for us. So it includes things like, answer changing pattern, keystroke data, time spent on items, and the number of screen visits, time of last response. And these are extremely useful because we can get different sources of information that provide us with a deeper understanding of how students interact with these items and how much effort has been put on the test. And this is especially helpful for low-stakes assessments such as ILSIS. However, test results alone are not comprehensive. And they're not enough for obtaining a full picture of what is going on. So again, this takes me back to the importance of looking deeper into the data and not make decisions or reach conclusions based on single scores. So let me just give you one simple example that why we need to look beyond achievements. So if you wanted to compare 3 candidates, okay, based on their GPA at the end of the same grade in high school. However, these are 3 different students that were in that grade at different time points. So if someone had to just, evaluate these students based on their grade point average, probably, they just say, okay, student 3 is the best student. However, there's so much more information that needs to be taken into account. For example, taking into account that student 1 got this GPA during the COVID lockdown, which obviously the learning conditions during that period were not ideal. There's more things that you could look at. For example, effort. So if you looked into effort, and again, as I said, these are real results from real students. You would identify that student 1 made the most effort, but student 3 made the least effort. So being able to look at effort in addition to the scores, it gives you a totally different perspective on these 3 students. That one student might be more hardworking, but they might be struggling because of the conditions that they might be going through, such as COVID, as I said before. Whereas another student might be able to understand things quickly, but they really don't try as hard. But if you're, let's say, an employer and you want to select a student, it's important to have this information as well. But if you look at other indicators, who has the most drive? Student 1 has the most drive, whereas student 3 is the most organized and is the best at time management. If you look at critical thinking, student 2 was the best at critical thinking. So it all depends on what you care about and what you want to get out of each student. So according to what you're interested in, it's so important to go beyond just the test scores. So again, this leads us back to process data. Now, why are process data so important to us? First of all, if I could use a term from economics, they're based on the revealed preference approach. And what does this say? What's the revealed preference approach? it basically tells you that you get more accurate information by observing someone in an activity rather than just asking them after the fact of what activities they engage with and what are their preferences in terms of, if they like something or not. So process data are unobtrusive and could be used to look at test taking situations and variables, and they can give us a better insight regarding the test taking process. The only challenge is knowing how to interpret them. However, response times so far have been one of the most frequently used metrics of process data from large-scale assessments. And a reason we have been using them so much is especially after the point where we started being provided with these data sets in an easy-to-use fashion. And response times are typically used as indicators of effort, and the main hypothesis that we make is that adequate time spent on test items is crucial for obtaining valid responses. However, is this adequate? The problem, though, with response time research is that it has mostly focused on identifying rapid guessing behavior. And the main assumption is that very short response times are typically interpreted as rapid guessing or disengaged behavior. However, just looking at response times alone does not provide us with the full picture of effort. There's other things that we need to look at. For example, if someone answered a question correctly or incorrectly in a short or long time. And in addition to that, there's no clear consensus regarding longer response times. So since most of the focus has in the research has focused on short response times, it's still not clear whether longer response times should be interpreted as disengagement, like someone is just staring at the screen, just zooming out, or if longer response times are indicators of persistence and effort, that someone is struggling with the items or working on the items in order to get a good result. And then the example that I typically give is this math problem from geometry, that if you have a right triangle and the two sides, one is 3, one is 4, and then you ask what is C equal to? Many times, a lot of people at conferences automatically know that C is equal to 5, just because they've seen this pattern many times when they were in their math lessons in schools. But if you don't really recognize a pattern and you have to solve a math problem with this, you would end up having to use the Pythagorean theorem, which is over here. But let's look at this problem by looking at 4 hypothetical students. So you might have student 1 and student 2, where student 1 answered this question in 2 seconds. They answered it correctly. Okay, but if they answered it correctly, most likely they already knew the answer. So the effort that they actually made was low, but it doesn't mean that necessarily this was a guess. This could more likely be interpreted that the student was already an expert on the topic. They already knew the answer without having to do the calculations. Whereas another student who might have answered in 5 seconds, which again is a short time period, but they got it wrong. So in this case, we could interpret this as low effort, because in 5 seconds, it's not likely that someone can solve this equation and get it correctly. So Yes, in this case, a very short answer could be considered as an indicator of a non-effort during the test. But then you have these two students, student 3 and student 5. Let's say that they both answered, spent 55 seconds on this item. So student 3 got it correct. We could assume that they probably
I think we lost Elena.
Yes.
We lost Elena.
Yeah.
Oh, there you are now. Okay. Sorry, keep trying. Oops. What happened?
Maybe you can pause the recording until she.
Sorry about that.
But the presentation slides.
Yeah, you need to repost
You need
your
to share your
presentation.
screen again.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, hold on a second. Can you see the slides now?
Not yet.
No.
No.
No. Okay, hold on a second. Let me share again.
Okay, there we go. Perfect.
Sorry. Okay, so I think I reached here. So basically the purpose of the study that I want to present is to evaluate the cases in which examinees have spent more time on test items to determine whether this extra time could be interpreted as an indicator of either persistence or of a lack of effort during the testing process. And the research questions were, to what extent do examinees spend more time than the median on test items, and how does this differ for items that were answered correctly and incorrectly? How does this extra time differ among educational systems? And to what extent do the frequency of slow responses, the sum of slow responses, the frequency of item visits, explain achievement at the student and at the country level, depending on answer correctness. And what I did is I focused on ETIMS data. So from grade 4, so there were 35 countries and educational systems. And I only looked at one booklet so that we have the same comparison in terms of items. And I only looked at multiple choice items. And the process data indicators that I utilized were the following: item screen visits, which basically represents the total number of times student visited the multiple choice items in their booklet. The overtime success count, which was equal to the number of items that were answered correctly in more time than the median, and specifically more time than the country's median. Overtime failure count, which indicated the number of items that were answered incorrectly while spending more time than the median. And then the two indicators of overtime success and overtime failure. And overtime success was the sum of the positive timing difference for items that were answered correctly in more time than the country's median, So basically, I looked at all of the cases, all of the answers that were correct and answered in more time than the median, and I took that timing difference and added it, summed it up to the overtime success indicator, and then for the items that were wrong in more time than the median, I added that to the overall failure. And this is what the results look like. In terms of the percentage of students engaged in overtime success and overtime failure. So overtime success is the light blue. We can see that there's a larger percentage of students in all these countries that had at least one case of overtime success. And there were less students that were engaged in overtime failure. The only two exceptions were, which I really haven't been able to identify, is the United States and Abu Dhabi, where the pattern is the other way around. Also, I looked at the time, and so it was the average amount of overtime success and overtime failure in seconds. And you can see that students that ended up spending more time on test items ended up getting those questions correct. So it's not clear if the reason we have this pattern here is that because students that ended up spending the extra time, that this extra time helped them to get the right result in the end, or and maybe if the answers that they got wrong, maybe if they had spent more time on it, maybe that would change, or if the ones that were wrong in the end were just questions that at some point the students realized, oh, this is something that I've never been taught. This is something that's too difficult for me. I'm not going to persist anymore on this. But I also looked at the relationship between item visits and country results. So here we can see the number of item visits for the multiple choice items. And here on the x-axis, you can see math achievement. So we have a positive relationship here. And the next thing I did is I did a multi-level model, where I wanted to look at these variables that I described before at both the student and the country level. And what we found is that all of these variables were statistically significant at the student level, and it explained 15% of the variance. However, at the country level, the percentage of variance explained was 59.4%. So it's a huge percentage, but there were only two variables that were statistically significant here. And so, but if we look at the student level indicators, so these are standardized estimates, we can see that these are positive. So visiting items frequently is associated with, getting better results. Spending more time both on correct and incorrect items is associated with higher levels of achievement, whereas the only one that had a negative beta value was overtime failure count. So what does this say, which actually makes sense, is that if you have too many items that you got wrong, most likely you really don't know the material. So no matter how much time you would spend on these items, you would end up getting them wrong in the end, and that's reflected in the person's overall achievement. Whereas at the country level, there must be other things going on here, because here we identified that overtime success, so spending more time on items was associated with lower achievement at the country level. So so this is a relationship that needs to be looked into further. I don't know if it's curriculum issues that influence this or what. So basically, what I did find is that students end up having more items that were answered correctly than incorrectly in more time than the median. Students typically spend more time on correctly answered questions than on incorrect one, which for me This shows that spending more time is more likely an indicator of persistence. But a high frequency of slow responses on incorrect items was indicative of lower performance, which is probably an indicator of struggling with items. However, as I said before, there were larger variations across countries and within countries. And the amount of time spent on both correct and incorrect responses had a positive effect on achievement at the student level, whereas more research is needed in this area at the country level to be able to explain this result. And however, this is just a beginning of the study, so more research is needed to look into it further. But more research is needed to look at whether similar results or patterns of results would have been obtained for grade 8 students, because grade 8 students have more experience with taking tests. Also, we need to look at it in other subjects. We need to look in more detail in relation to the examinee characteristics and country variables in relation to these indicators, and also try to determine if these indicators could be used or calculated with polytomous items. But in conclusion, what I'd like to say from all of this presentation and both of these examples is that we definitely, by using large-scale assessments, we need to move beyond rankings. Because although league tables do capture people's attention, the true value of ILSAs lie in their ability to provide insights into the educational process or into the test-taking process. And ILSAs do provide comprehensive data sets and background variables beyond achievement to understand outcomes over time. Process data are a great addition to provide a window into students' minds that need to be explored further, but we should move beyond emphasizing the questions that ILSAs cannot answer and identify the ways in which they can help us improve the future. So with this, I've reached the end of my presentation, and I'd like to thank you and open the discussion for any questions that you might have.
Thank you, Elena. So if there's any questions from the participants, you can unmute yourself and ask, or type it on the chat.
I'd be happy to share the presentation.
Yeah, I
as
think
well.
somebody said to share. I think you might be able to share on the chat. Oh, stop the recording. Yes.